Okay, I'd like to do is uh, ask for a resolution for of the May 19th meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the May 19th meeting minutes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The May 19th meeting minutes are approved. Ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting minutes of March 10th.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The committee has approved the March 10th. Before we get started, I'd like to just request if committee members have any comments on where we're at in the process.
Thank you, Gordon. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. I wanted to, first of all, welcome you officially and formally to the Strategic Planning Subcommittee and appreciate your leadership. It's going to be very much needed. I think probably the most important part of this is we spent a good year meeting with stakeholder groups and strategizing about a plan, but the plan will mean nothing if we don't implement it with fidelity and execute it well. I also wanted to acknowledge a couple other of my colleagues, if I could, just briefly. And this is our first meeting since we changed the composition of the membership. And there's some colleagues not here, and certainly wanted to be on record to thank Dan Elsner and Sarah O'Brien for their work on the original subcommittee that we did. And I believe at some point all of our members were involved, but I know they were especially involved as members of the subcommittee. And also, I guess, express a bit of disappointment in the decision of the superintendent not to stay a member of the committee. It concerns me because I believe that we had some very good conversation in the development of the plan, and now that we move into an implementation phase, I'm concerned about how that works when our state superintendent has voluntarily resigned from the subcommittee. And to that end, I would just say this. My understanding, at least what was communicated to me, was that she's too big a committee. But I will acknowledge my colleagues who are here because every one of us sitting in full-time jobs. We've all are going to sacrifice this week by being here, and not only so. I'm glad to be here. It's very critically important work, but it does concern me when I'm too busy, because I think this is the most important thing that we do of the State Board of Education is not just put a plan together, but it's the way we come together, work legally, work on behalf of our students, and actually implement this plan. So I appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments on that, Gordon, and again, look forward to your leadership.
Thank you.
It's great to be back on the committee with my colleague and some new colleagues on the committee. To echo my colleague on my just said, one of the things with the strategic plan is the implement component. Without the state superintendent, who's responsible for implementation, I'm really concerned that this may be another strategic plan that sits up on the book thing, nothing happens. And so I hope meeting or in a future meeting we can roll it out how the CEO, the state superintendent, is going to assist in implementing the strategic plan. My other comment has to do with the actual budget. I read in a newspaper, didn't get any email from DO, that the state superintendent has a budget of, and I want information about that. Because in our initial planning work, we kept emphasizing how important it was for the budget to be seamlessly aligned strategic plan. And there's many things in our strategic plan that are going to require additional funding or maybe shifting in from one area to another. And without our ability to inform, give advice on the deal, we're sort of left with nothing. And so again, for me, is how is budget going to be aligned with the strategic plan, and that may be an issue for a future meeting that we really need to get into some details about.
David, if I may add to that point, as it relates to the budget, as the newest member of the State Board of Education, in reviewing our duties on this board, it's come to my attention that the board is responsible for approving certain aspects or all of the budget, and I'm looking for further clarification on that. So I have requested the staff to provide an opinion, legal opinion, as to what our duties are as to budgetary approval of the Department of Education. So, and of course, the department has as to that point, we would entertain that input. And I would like to echo the comments as it relates to the absence of the superintendent at this training committee. I received an email last from her chief of staff who indicated that the superintendent's duties for service on numerous boards, commissions, task forces, for statewide travel to support our schools and for the upcoming legislative session require a substantial amount of time, and therefore she is stepping off the strategic planning committee of the State Board of Education. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the superintendent today at Huntington Elementary School. Okay. Well, let's assume that's. If so, I do want to publicly commend her for taking the time out of her schedule to elementary students, but I am in her absence from the Strategic Planning Committee of the State Board of Education, which Dr. Oliver indicated has a significant importance in the Department of Education.
Thanks, Oliver.
Yep. So, any comments? Any further?
If I could pick, I mean, I have a little bit different perspective than my fellow members here being a teacher. You're all on point with the fact that if that which gets monitored gets done, and if we want these things and implemented with fidelity, then we all fit with the idea. Our staff, we all have to be on the page if we want teachers to buy. If not, they're going to pay for the next plan in 2 years, and we're not going to buy into it. All have the same page. I think when we're not all present, that's difficult to do.
And I don't think anyone up here today is stating that the superintendent should not be in the Indiana schools. We think that's a vital and important part of her job. Of course, she's the only one on the state board whose full-time responsibilities relate to the Indiana Department of Education. But noting that, I still think the importance of what we're doing here today is the Strategic Planning Committee and its impact on Indiana's K-12 education. I would personally hope that it would reconsider her decision to step off. Any other comments?
I just make one more. As I look at the strategic plan, some of the goals, maybe not everyone has memorized the goals yet, but goal 1 is to ensure that all students in Indiana learn. So this has nothing to do with the state board or us. It has to do with kids. Goal 2 has to do with maximizing the potential of human talent in schools. Again, directly related to children in schools. And goal 3, increase the involvement and support of all Indiana stakeholders. Again, it's not about the State Board of Education or us. It's about schools and children in schools. And I'm greatly disappointed that she was unable to participate with us.
Gordon, if I could, one other follow-up too, and this goes to something that you had asked at the last meeting of the full state board about a legislative agenda. We were told that the staff at the DOE had not really started on that. I believe that was something to that effect was the response. But the next morning, there were 2 legislative initiatives laid out in a memorandum and in terms of funding and textbooks. And I would just say this, I think my biggest concern about her absence is that, as my colleague shared here, that the budget has to be aligned to work the plan. We also need to be working to identify legislative remedies that may be needed. I do believe there are things that are included in our strategic plan that for them to be successful may require some communication from the state board to legislative leadership where either a revision is going to be need to be made to an existing statute or perhaps new legislation altogether. And I think that's something that we best come to working in a collegial way with the state superintendent of trying to combine her vision with the vision of the state board, but also then juxtaposing that against what statutes exist or what statutes need to exist. And I would just say as we go forward, we're going to have to be very mindful how we work around that if she's going to not participate. We can't let that stop us. At the same time, too, we have to be very realistic that we are going to need to figure out a way to forward legislative initiatives, because I don't see how we do some of this work without engaging our colleagues over in the Indiana General Assembly for some assistance in these things.
Well, and just to echo that, our part of our statutory responsibility is to provide recommendations to the General Assembly on legislation, and I think that's an important responsibility of the State Board of Education. So I think that hopefully the Strategic Planning Committee can consider in the coming months. And as I noted at our last board meeting, time is short, but hopefully we can discuss legislation that might be worthy of adoption by the Indiana General. And before we get started, too, I think it merits further discussion or just pointing out the purpose of the Strategic Planning Committee. And I would just like to read from the resolution that created the Strategic Planning Committee. It says, the SBOE hereby creates a new Strategic Planning Committee that will, 1, ensure implementation plan, 2, develop new and update metric implementation of the plan, 3, continue to improve upon the plan as needed, 4, seek input and support from education and community stakeholders to enable effective implementation of the plan, and 5, align the plan as needed with the strategic plans adopted by the Career Council, the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, and the Department of Workforce Development to ensure optimal coordination of state resources for the benefit of Indiana students, families, educators, schools, and communities. And lastly, to periodically report to the Board of Education. So I think the next step, or the next item on our agenda today, is a discussion as to the strategic plan and balanced scorecard. Call on Claire Fitting Green to provide a presentation.
Thank you for joining the committee. We have put together some slides that we're going to take a little bit of a break from when we have some guests from Pioneer who will present in the second item on here. What we will discuss today in alignment with the agenda is how do we actually take the balance scorecard that the entire board approved and then actually start to use that to guide the board and all the stakeholders. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We'll also talk about the priority strategies that were identified during the strategic planning process, and the board actually, as a reminder, initiated rulemaking on this at Dr. Freitas's request to provide more clarity. Should significant reform look like, and that's very much in line with conversations that the state has had with the U.S. Department. We're fortunate that some work is going on another priority initiative in the of our plan was how do we make sure that we are engaging in a meaningful way with stakeholders and all on a regular basis moving forward. And then we'd like to talk about there's a long list of strategies the board came up with, and we have limited time and attention on all of us, so I want to go through that exercise. So moving into next steps with the balance scorecard, I will call on Brad in just a moment to talk about his prior experience using the balance scorecard. He's worked with SELF in the to talk about is working with our colleagues at the department and Danielle, our colleagues here, and hope to be able to work with her around how do we actually start to populate the balance scorecard and use that at our board meetings. And our proposal to you right now, if you look at many of our metrics, are really manual in nature. And as we start to identify some additional strategies to put meat on the bones, we might have some more frequent metrics, but really to use it on a monthly basis probably will make sense. We'd like to recommend and hear the feedback about using it on a quarterly basis to present to the board. Here's how we're tracking the metrics. Starting with our November meeting, we could work with our colleagues in anticipation and preparation for that to show you the data we currently have. And by that time, we will have the new ref rates, the updated IRENG data that reflects the tests, et cetera, for each review. So we're going to talk about that.
Is Claire, if I could, is there plans to make it available off the state board website? Because I think that's the other thing too. I agree with the quarterly meetings. I think that's at a minimum that is reasonable for the board to look at that, and it is a living document. But I also think in terms of it being a communication document, knowing that it's going to be updated all the time, but I think it should be warehoused essentially there.
Yeah. So right now the plan is posted, but we can also work to create a summary dashboard.
That's exactly, yeah. That would be ideal.
Have to do that. I think Gordon has a vision of being more frequently initially, especially
Absolutely.
in terms of presenting that to the board, having it on a quarterly basis. Makes sense.
Absolutely.
I have a question on that. Certainly for the trend data metrics, annual basis or quarterly basis is fine. But I'd like more frequent updates on the process. How is it being implemented? Who's responsible? How is that going? So I'd like to see maybe monthly, just a brief, maybe a 10, 15-minute presentation by DOE on what's happening procedurally so we know that it is being implemented. Once some trust is built up, then maybe we go to every other month. But at least initially, I want to be sure that people are responsible, that it is happening, and procedurally it is moving forward.
That actually follows well. The second bullet here is that we were recommending having project plan updates on a monthly basis.
Sure.
With the board, and as you will recall, some of the strategies that the board adopted actually line with the waiver, and we already have as a standing item updates from the department on the status of our frequency in the waiver. So I think that could all together use it in a consistent format. That makes sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Now, the most important part about starting to implement balance scorecards, not only is that the general topics that we focus on as we set agendas and do our work, we also have to continue to refine the metrics, and in some cases we haven't yet identified metrics. We also have not established targets. So part of what we want to talk with you about, and again, we need to collaborate with the department, and also other stakeholders who all said they'd like to help us where we hadn't yet identified metrics. And they were, especially some of our post-secondary partners, said that there was lots of research data that helped inform. We actually need to come up with targets for each of these strategies. So what we'd like to propose is that you ask the staff to work together and identify appropriate stakeholders to help us develop some that we bring to you, get your thoughts on it for the coming meetings. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Great. We will also need your help on assigning, as we come up with what our priority strategies are, and assigning project leaders. And again, we'll need to work with the department on that, many of the the next part of this is we actually have not established yet what our overarching targets, and wanted to start the conversation today, and maybe at the coming meeting at the chair's pleasure, and spend a little time taking this together. But wanted to at least start thinking on this. Right now we have discrete metrics, and we will be establishing micro targets, if you will. We haven't yet developed what are the overarching targets that we're striving to achieve. And as the leader knows, and all of our leaders, various organizations and day jobs, as we kind of have been struggling with some things we develop for actually getting there. So the prior targets for K-12 were the 90-25-90. The goal was to have 90% of all kids in position on the relay and math. I set the ECA, 90% graduation rate, and then 25% of graduates achieving college and career benchmarks. So I wanted to just make sure that you were aware of that, some of you were newer members of the board, but also raise the point for those of you who have worked with metrics in the past. Metrics can also lead to put a course incentives in place. So for example, a 90% graduation rate target is great, but you've also seen an increase in the number or percentage of waiver diplomas being granted. That may be a desirable outcome, that may not be, but I think those are some of the things that we're keep in mind. So I wanted to at least tee this up and get your feedback. First of all, do you agree that this is something that we still have yet to do, and that this is the task of this committee to do?
Yes. Does that 90% now, we just adopted, and forgive me, I can't remember if it was 10% on the waiver rates. But we just put something in place, and I can't remember the number that was on it. Was it 10%? Was that 90% align with what we just did?
When you make your House Enrolled Act, ones there are 5 that have that component.
Well, and as a board, we made a recommendation for a percentage of
3-year average.
3-year average of what? I don't remember what it was.
10%.
Okay, that's what I thought. I want to make sure that was.
And that was always, it was never at 100% in the address system or the goal, because there are always going to be certain students that will need a waiver from our.
Will the balanced scorecard be dynamic enough then, as we look at graduation rates, to also look at the waivers at the same time and have that combined into some kind of a indicator of how we're doing? Because it really could be skewed if there's a dramatic increase in the rate of waivers. It could show that the graduation rates have increased, but it's really a pseudo or false kind of indicator. Will the balanced scorecard be able to ferret that out?
Yeah, the department does report that data, and I think they post it on their website, and so that's certainly something that if you would like us to make sure we're tracking and reporting on a dynamic basis, that would be, I think, relatively easy to do.
Okay.
So again, just wanted to get your reaction to this, keep this up, and then that actually leads into some of the comments that you made earlier on toward another room to committee, was ensuring that we're actually spending our time toward achieving the strategies that the board's identified and making sure that we create sufficient resources and attention to those things.
So your thoughts, and first of all, I totally agree that having these broad overarching targets that we're measuring with metrics is very important for us. Are you proposing coming up with those targets at the committee level and presenting it to the board for approval?
Yes, I think it would be good, perhaps at the next meeting, at your pleasure, that the committee actually spend some time thinking about that. Because, we have 3 goals. There's student achievement, and then there's human talent, and then there's stakeholder engagement. There may be some softer targets that the board might want to adopt. Probably don't want to have more than 5, because then it starts to get too many. But something that's always kind of at the forefront that we're always talking about as we think about the work that's happening in Indiana and education.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
All right, the next topic, my colleague Ashley Cowder, who just joined CACI, and I forget her title, Director of Programs and Projects. And she previously worked at TNTP, and so has lots of experience with RISE system teacher evaluations and principal evaluations. So she's going to talk about this.
Great, welcome, Ashley.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
As Dr. Frey has mentioned, with the strategic plan, we have 2 big goals that will prioritize through this conversation around teacher and principal evaluation. Goal 2 around maximizing human talent for our teachers and leaders at schools, and then also involving stakeholders in conversation. So what we're going to do during this section is really looking at what the requirements are for teacher evaluation, both the state requirements that we have, the federal requirements of ESBA waiver, and then also what the commitments are in the Indiana waiver in terms of what we're providing around teacher and principal evaluation. So to start, in 2011, there was legislation that pushed through requiring that certified employees receive performance evaluations. And from there, we defined exactly who that requires to have those evaluations. The certified employees were defined as teachers, principals, and others whose contracts require the person to hold a license or a permit. So this includes teachers that we see in traditional public schools, principals that we see in our schools, and also charter school teachers. The statute mandated that the school corporations develop a plan for annual performance evaluation, and there was some flexibility allowed there. And there were 3 plans that were outlined in the statute that school districts could choose. One was using master teachers, or contracting with organizations or vendors that provide master teachers. The system for teacher and student advancement, we call it TAP. The TAP system is an option, and then the peer assistance and review teacher evaluation system. When we looked at what the actual plan requirements were, there are 6 elements here. One was that performance evaluations for certified employees be conducted at least annually. They also require that there are objective measures of student achievement and growth that significantly inform the evaluation. We are going to talk more about significantly informed use. And then we also have some requirements specifically around the state assessment results for teachers who teach in areas that have state mandated assessments. And then also set requirements around methods for using student achievement for teachers who don't have state mandated assessments. We've got some requirements there. And then also the requirements for the student assessment results for locally developed assessments and other tests that measures for certified employees whose responsibilities may or may not include instruction in subject areas where we have statewide mandated assessments.
My understanding is that that section of statute addresses TAP somewhat differently in terms of what it has to include versus other RISE and RISE-like models. Is that correct? I've had superintendents approach me, for example, and say that there's flexibility in TAP that does not exist in other models. And if we can't answer today, it's something I would like to put in the parking lot, but I would like to have some direction from staff on, or some analysis from staff on how the current legislation views the TAP model versus RISE and RISE-like models that fall under that same section, because I have seen it. I mean, I had a superintendent sit down and show it to me. I get what they're getting at, and to me, I want to make sure as we look at this, we look at it holistically and not create systems that basically pit one versus the other and trying to accomplish the same goal. I think that makes sense to me, at least in terms of us having some discussion around that.
Sure. I think we can definitely pull out what the specific requirements are of TAP and RISE and maybe do a crosswalk for you to show you what exactly is required in each of the systems.
That'd be great.
So that you can kind of compare and contrast the two. That'd be helpful.
Very much so, thank you.
We also have the following indicators that we have to follow here. In terms of the requirements, are that there are rigorous measures of effectiveness, including observations and performance indicators. And in terms of the actual designation of certified employee performance buckets, there are 4 areas that we have for performance buckets with highly effective, improvement necessary, and effective. Those are the categories in which performance can fall. And then also there's a required explanation of the evaluator's recommendations for improvement and the time in which improvement is expected. So we all know that the purpose of teacher evaluation is to grow folks, to grow teachers, to grow people who are working in our schools. And that's where it's laid specifically out, that we provide that feedback, and then we also provide the next steps and supports to make improvements in areas that need improvement. The final piece is that a teacher who negatively affects student achievement and growth cannot receive a rating of highly effective or effective.
That seems to make sense.
Yes, it does.
Explain that one to me. What is that?
So, for example, negatively affecting student achievement can mean multiple things. It can mean doing harm to children. It could also mean if there's negative growth through the course of a year, significant negative growth. We could also say that does not constitute a highly effective or effective rating if you've had negative student growth through the course of the year. But again, it could also mean doing harm to children. There are a lot of different definitions of what that can mean, but that negatively affects student growth.
I agree with that, but I'm also mindful as I walk through schools that there are concerns with the current teacher evaluation model in terms that the system, when it views that, there are teachers who are going to have challenges that they're dealing with that are non-academic in nature, and they're more frequent in nature because of the position they hold within the school. That's not an excuse, by the way. I'm just saying I'd like to take a harder look at how the evaluation model arrives at that conclusion, because I wouldn't want to leap immediately to, well, because they're in this category because of performance, therefore that somehow it was completely and totally the teacher's fault. It might have been. I have also seen situations where the challenges were such that if we're not careful how our model handles that, it could create a scenario in which teachers say, why would I go teach in a high at-risk environment because I'm basically setting myself up for a label. And I think that there's probably been some reaction of fear around that, but I also think there's some legitimacy to it. So I think we need to take a very common sense, very neutral review of this. We've been at this now a couple of years now since this was enacted. Find out what's working well and be ready to be honest about where we need to make some adjustments.
Yes, this is what the statement of feedback that become really important. And we've got highlights of that here. Sandy and Hardy from IU will also share some of those things that have come up in their assessments of teacher evaluation and how the implementation has gone so far. But we also want to continue to remind ourselves that teacher evaluation is done multiple times through the course of the year. So I'm a teacher, so I remember days where I wasn't at my best, but through the course of the year, when that observation information is looked at, overall, was it that every single one of my days were bad days, or did I just kind of have an off day as teachers we have?
And what is the specific timing of the teacher evaluations during the year? You say multiple times. Yeah, just help me understand. Is it, what are the dates typically?
Local control and limiting. So we usually say it's best practice to have 2 long observations through the course of the year and 3 short observations through the course of the year. So we've got a lot of data to look at as you create summative evaluation ratings for the teacher. Now, because there was local control involved with the teacher evaluation model, not everybody does that. So there are a lot of school districts that just have 3 evaluations through the course of the year. 1 of them is long and 2 of them are short. So
If I could, I'll give you our example. We have 2 hour-long observations, 1 30-minute observation in the year, but weekly we have 1 20-minute observation every week, 15 to 20 minutes once a week, and then we have 2 hour-longs and 1 30-minute long throughout the year. That may just give you a handle.
Okay. Regarding this number 6 about the deficit part of it, I was curious about the other end. There are some teachers who are really fabulous and outstanding in the state of Indiana, and I was reading the code and trying to find a provision in there that provides for some recognition of those really outstanding teachers, and I don't see it in the code. Is that missing, or where is it?
So we're actually, when we look at what Indiana's committed to as waiver, there is an area in the waiver where they actually talk about how they are rewarding highly effective teachers. And we'll get to that point in a few minutes, but there is a way, there's money put forth to compensate highly effective teachers in the state. There are also a lot of school districts that have set up their own compensation models and requirements that they have to financially reward teachers. We also have systems like the Teacher of the Year program. And we've got programs like the IPS is using to reward the highly effective teachers in the district called the Hubbard Award for Excellence in Teaching. So there are different ways, but it looks very different from what the state is offering versus what districts are offering.
Do we capture any kind of those initiatives and programs that reward teachers in any significant way? Does DOE keep track of those? And I'm not really talking about the individual awards. We can certainly look those up, but I'm kind of curious about at the local level, how they either compensate or reward highly effective teachers year after year after year. How is that done? Because we really want to think about proposing some legislation that really celebrates and reward teachers who have made significant gains with student achievement, and they may become models of how it can be done. And so do we do anything like that from DOE?
We were just talking about the legislative pieces regarding the performance dollars.
Yes.
They're new, so there's a 30 million and a 2 million, so in terms of tracking, it's not really new to track, but we are involved heavily, as you know.
Right.
Directly for how districts use those dollars.
So I know it's new, but is there a plan to track that, report back to the board on teachers who need to be celebrated? And how is that going to be done? You don't know yet?
Name or?
No, not necessarily by name, but by districts and so forth. I think we at the state board could do much more to celebrate great teaching. And sometimes we focus in on a deficit model, and I think we should be celebrating those teachers, and it may be by name where we recognize them in a certain kind of way, but certainly if we can put forth some of that $30 million in substantive kind of ways, I think it might make a difference in a positive way.
Sure. And Sarah Pease and Risa Renee are joining us soon from the department, so they can probably answer that question much more succinctly than I.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Gordon, sorry, go.
Brad, go ahead.
I just want to piggyback off of what David is asking for, because it's something I want to study as well. Talking with teachers, one of the things I am concerned about is do we have enough differentiation to set those effective teachers apart from those teachers that are not being as effective? And I'm talking about in terms of the performance bonus, the distribution of performance bonus. The other thing I'm concerned about too is that with the way that this was enacted, and I absolutely believe in local control and local autonomy. But my concern is that sometimes in trying to do the right thing, you create unintended side effects. And one of the ones that I'm seeing right now is an exchange of teachers looking across county lines, looking across local school district lines, where a base can be paid a different amount just simply because the assessed value and the tax rate to raise the levy varies enough that it's financially to their benefit to move over. I'm concerned about that. I'm more concerned about how the performance grant ends up once it gets pushed through those 4 buckets. Because I've had several teachers, not just one or two, I've had several teachers inform me that basically that amount is dropping out, and when it's all said and done, to about $700 in 1 year on top of their base salary, which if you're a second or third year teacher is not even keeping up with the price of the health insurance premium increases, so they're actually at a deficit, but yet we're saying they're highly effective. So I know it's new, and sometimes when you innovate, it takes a couple times coming at it, and so I don't look at it and think, hey, it was perfect the first time out, but I think to the point that David is making, if the department has that data, they need to make it available so that we can help keep the legislature informed of what the data is telling us. Is it doing what we thought it said it was going to do? And if not, what recommendations will we offer as the policy setting body in Indiana for education on how to remedy that?
And we'll look a little bit at the distribution ratings from 2012 to 2013 school year as we move forward, and the 2013-2014 school year distribution ratings will be available on the DOE website to the public on December 15th.
Okay.
So when we look specifically at RISE, we're on slide 9 here. We have a few things that we want to highlight here, different codes that we want to pay attention to. So Indiana Code 2028 11.5-8 requires that the SBOE shall adopt rules establishing grading criteria, metrics, and standards as described for teacher evaluation, which detail the development and adoption, evaluator training, and evaluation measures, which were adopted by SBOE in February of 2012. We also have Indiana Code that requires the SBOE to work with the Department of Education to develop and model an evaluation plan and ensure the availability of ongoing training and use of evaluation. This was the collaboration to create the RISE evaluation and development system, which was rolled out early in 2012. We also know that SBOE must work with the department to ensure the availability of ongoing training and the use of performance evaluation to ensure that all evaluators and certified employees have access to information on the plan and the plan's implementation is done. And we also have requirements that the DOE report on the results of the staff evaluations to the SBOE and the general public by December 15th of each year. So last year's teacher distribution ratings will see rolled out by December 15th this year. Now we're going to look at the federal USDA waiver requirements. This is really important so we know exactly what's required from the USDOE. We have 6 elements here. The first is that we will use teacher evaluation. We will use that for continual improvement of instruction. Teacher evaluation is meant to grow people. So we want to pay attention to the first point there. Also that they meaningfully differentiate performance using at least 3 performance levels, as we saw in our state requirements here, highly effective, necessary, and ineffective. We also are required to use multiple value measures in determining performance levels, including a significant factor with student achievement data and other measures of professional practice, which might be multiple formats and sources. So we've got professional development that plays in there. Some districts still use teacher portfolios, and we also have teacher leaders who receive credit for being teacher leaders for their evaluation. On point 4 here, we evaluate teachers and principals on a regular basis. So as we talked about just a few minutes ago, that looks different from district to district in the state, where BJ has a more frequent process with other districts that just follow 3 evaluations a year or 5. We also want to make sure that they provide clear and timely feedback that is useful and feedback that identifies needs to guide professional development. So basically, if you're going into a classroom to evaluate a teacher, you're giving really great feedback after that evaluation on how they can grow, why they're growing, and then providing them with the professional development resources to actually get there. And then on point 6 here, we are also required to use that information, the teacher evaluation information, to make personnel decisions according to the SBOE federal requirements of labor. On slide 11 here, the SEA must develop and adopt guidelines for these systems. So we had the RISE model roll out in Indiana, fall of 2012, that provided some guidance there, and we also allowed local control on what that would look like. But regardless, we had to make sure that the implementation of the evaluation system, no matter what the evaluation system looked like, was done with fidelity, and that there were resources provided on an ongoing basis to help them roll out those evaluation systems with fidelity. So to the second point there, we've got to make sure that there's high quality implementation. You'll see as we move forward on a couple of slides, there's been consistent feedback from stakeholders that has been a concern with ongoing support, and then also making sure that as an individual district, for example, that maybe doesn't have as much human capital as they would like to conduct teacher evaluations, that there's some sort of support available. And then making sure that the development and implementation of these support plans, that the SEA also provides student growth data on current students. That we have these things in place in Indiana. But making sure that those student growth measures, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about SLOs, which are the goals that teachers set in terms of the growth that's expected for their students in the course of the year, and then stakeholder feedback that has been given to us around concerns with the SLO and support for developing SLOs and implementing SLOs. So we're going to look specifically at...
Can I ask a question there? How do we plan to evaluate those principals and administrators that are doing the evaluations themselves? How can we ensure that the data that we're receiving is valid?
That's a really good question.
I'm not saying that it's not, I'm just saying that's questions I get, that, you know, building to building, things may look different and things may change, and you may evaluate me and say I'm great, and Claire may evaluate me and say I'm ineffective. Mm-hmm. How do we ensure, what does that training look like for them to where if you both go in the room and do an evaluation, it's lined up, we're pretty much on the same page?
Yeah, making sure that people are normed.
Absolutely.
In teacher evaluations. So there have been, and we'll talk more about this when we look specifically at what's been provided or what the DOE is committed to in the Indiana waiver. There have been trainings that have been provided by the regional education services that have allowed trainings on teacher evaluation. There have been 9 of those that were offered from July through September. And we'd like to know, I think, how many teachers have actually attended those trainings. But what's happened is teachers have gone to trainings and the administrators have gone to trainings, and then they go back and teach folks in their own district and train them. So it becomes a train-the-trainer kind of model. In terms of norming, it depends on where you are. So we've seen districts that have been very consistent with making sure that everybody is refreshed on training. So if you maybe haven't evaluated this year for whatever reason, if I'm your principal, I'm going with you to make sure that we are seeing the same things and that feedback is also normed. It doesn't exist everywhere. And the quality control piece, people are doing what they're doing because they have the resources that they have.
And that's my fear. I think in IPS, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Evansville, it's not an issue because the resources are there, but in some of the rural communities, I'm not sure that a single principal can evaluate 60 people in a year, 3 times a year effectively. I don't know, and I'm sure there's no money to hire someone to help them. So what can we do, or what can the DOE do to kind of assist some of those, rural communities where there aren't the resources to complete those? Okay, sorry, I jumped ahead, I apologize.
Similar kind of question, it's not really on the training. I think the training by DOE has been positive, and I'm receiving a lot of good feedback on that. So I think generally people know what the process is. My concern was some data we received probably 6 to 8 months ago which showed that a very high percentage of teachers throughout the state of Indiana received highly effective or effective. I think it was over 90%. Don't quote me on that, but it seemed to be over 90%. And without preempting that discussion, I had a lot of people ask me, what's the value of the system if virtually every teacher is highly effective and effective? And maybe that's the case. But it seems to me maybe there's an implementation issue on how principals implement the particular standards. And what struck a lot of people was that schools that were rated D and F in particular, over 90% of those teachers were rated highly effective and effective. And so it raises questions about the fidelity of our system. So it may be addressed later in our meeting, but I think it's an issue we're going to have to come back to and discuss. So right now in legislation and in our rules, there's nothing that requires principals, for example, to have a certain percentage of teachers at the higher end and so forth. It's totally discretionary on the part of principals. Has there been any discussion about that that's still a concern, that a disproportionate percentage of teachers in Indiana are rated highly effective and effective, and what's the plan to address that?
Right, that might be something she could discuss.
In the meantime, why don't we, BJ, did you have a comment? We'll get back to that.
This, I'm not sure is the appropriate place and cover, I hope it's not, but in conversations that I've had with some superintendents, their recommendation is, and I know that stair steps are gone. Our teachers understand that. But my thought is, in order to ensure that we have quality people coming into this profession, that we allow or put stair steps back into place for those teachers that are rated highly effective and effective. So I'm sure when I'm 22 years old, I know that as long as I come in and I do my job for the next 15 years, I can raise my family on it, I can earn a living. And those teachers that are not highly effective or effective, that's going to leave a sum of money that's there. And that is what you use for teachers at the top of the scale that are allowed to still earn bonuses for being highly effective or effective. And that does two things. One, I think it deepens the depth of our talent pool by people that want to come into our profession. And two, it ensures that school corporations have some skin in the game. Because if I rate you highly effective, I don't have to give you a raise, or I have to give there's dollars tied to it. And right now, I'm not, dollars are tied to it if monies are available. And I think when you tie a dollar amount to it, I think the fidelity with which it's instituted would increase.
With that stair-step model, I just want to be sure that the highly effective and effective teachers are not penalized.
Absolutely.
And there's a high likelihood that it could just be everyone gets a certain percentage. And somehow I want to ensure, not this morning, but down the road through legislation, probably or through rules, that highly effective and effective teachers are getting significant rewards for their hard work. And in the current system, I don't see that happening. And in fact, based on how principals rate teachers generally, it's never going to happen because everyone is highly effective and effective.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the credibility of the rating system. And, if, you can't implement those rewards without having a evaluation system that's credible. So just as an example, if the average grade at Harvard University for undergraduates is an A, then, I'm sure they're all smart kids and everything, but, we need to figure out a way to distinguish the true successful and the true leaders in the classroom, and not, while we may believe that the teachers are effective, I think when you have such a high percentage, it's very, it needs to be based on a significant amount of metrics that are, lend credibility to the actual score or evaluation.
If I may, I know time has elapsed, but I think it's critically important to remember that the first year of implementation ratification of the law was the 12-13 school year. And that was also the time last year at which the DOE improperly issued RISE 2.5 without board approval, which dropped the weight of the ISTEP performance and growth data. So I think that's a major contributing factor to why you saw that high percentage of effective and highly effective. So it'll be interesting to see the data this year and how that plays out. But I know the board initiated making in response to the concerns that the USDA have for waiver, which that was an area of non-compliance. They have also said that they delayed their approval of the amendments to Principle 3 for our renewal because they want to get more information about how exactly will student performance and growth data be used for teacher evaluations, and will it meet the requisite threshold? Plus, the USDA is in the process of developing guidance, although it's, to my knowledge, they have not issued that yet. So I think it's very timely that the board initiated rulemaking, that we're having this conversation, and we there's some very interesting information from IU. So I want to make sure we get plenty of time to hear that in that conversation. And then I think because you have initiated rulemaking, you need to actually work and work with RISA and the experts at the department and also USDA on what would be acceptable. How can we ensure fidelity of communication and a fair and appropriate evaluation system?
Great. Why don't we continue with your presentation, Ashley?
So we'll go through some of the highlights of the commitments that were in the SBOE waiver. These are important because a lot of the questions that you guys have been asking are related to things that have been committed in the waiver. So I'm going to just highlight a few of these. You have this in front of you for the nitty-gritty. We are using RISE 2.0 in this. And with that, one of the things that we're looking at and what was committed in the waiver was the groups of teachers. So we talked specifically about the 3 groups of teachers and what weight is put on that teacher's evaluation with their student achievement results. So in group 1, 50% guidance was given, was 50% of the weight of a teacher's evaluation would be for student outcomes. And then when we look at group 2, it was 40%, and group 3 was 25% for student achievement. In terms of the groups of teachers, depending on whether or not that's a teacher who teaches at a state-mandated content area and grade level, where there's a state-mandated assessment. So one of the big things that came up, and it was in conversation earlier, was a significantly informed. So while we have this guidance of what weight should be carried based on the content area and grade level the teacher teaches and what assessments are made available, the actual language that we have is that student achievement and growth will significantly inform the teacher's summative teacher evaluation rating. So a lot of the questions that have come up from stakeholders and from you guys, because it's significantly informed, it was very different everywhere.
What was the breakdown the last time around between the use of the RISE model and the use of other models? Do we know?
I think, Doctor.
Dr. Head has that data.
Okay, terrific.
So if we move to slide 13, another commitment that was made was that the IDOE is collaborating with Indiana University Center for Education and Lifelong Learning. This is Sandy and Hardy who are here with us today. They were also, the IDOE is also serving as on the advisory council for INTAS, which is the tool that's looking at the quality of implementation, which Sandy and Hardy will talk more about. And on slide 14, we have some additional components. On the freebie here, we're ensuring that the LEAs implement their teacher and principal evaluation and supports them, that they're implementing them, and that there are resources provided to help them with implementation. So IDOE partnered with the regional education service centers who provided the training, the RISE training, and those were done July through September. Also on 3BI, we're looking at Indiana's high-quality plan for ensuring its teachers and principals, their evaluation system inform personnel decisions. So one of the notes that's in the waiver is that the idea we will be monitoring the effect of personnel changes in its LEA monitoring process beginning this school year. That information would be made available to look at what's actually happening when we have these personnel shifts in schools. And that information that is this waiver by 2015, 2016, it should be possible to validate the impact of leadership changes by analysis of shifts in the aggregate evaluation results. And if we look at our last section here, and we kind of look at the timeline of things that are happening and supports that are being provided. So in September, the LEAs had to provide what their teacher evaluation plan and support plan looks like to the DOE. The DOE also partnered with Great Lakes Comprehensive Center and the Center for Great Teachers and Leaders and are working to create a robust monitoring process to verify implementation and inform support and technical assistance. So I think to a couple of the points that Brad was asking about earlier, and what you mentioned, implementation, that monitoring process may be able to provide information on what's actually happening and where the gaps are. Sandy and Hardy also can, we'll talk more about the tasks tool that's helping with that. And also that the DOE's educator effectiveness staff will provide feedback to LEAs within 60 days of completing the monitoring activity. So once they're out in schools, within 60 days, they'll look at and provide feedback to the district on what they're seeing. In that this partnership with IU, Sandy and Harden here, will help them figure out what are the strengths, what are LEA's strengths with implementation of the teacher evaluation, principal evaluation process, and where are their areas of improvement. And they're also collaborating with the Indiana Association of School Principals and then also the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents to develop guidance and technical assistance around observation and feedback particularly. And Brad on slide 18 have the teacher distribution and numbers and evaluation was 2012 earlier.
Offer just two very quick observations. I'm very mindful of the time, but before our presenters, before we switch, I have the stream from my share. I am that the reaction to in front of us right now, legislative remedy that tries to quantify that percentage, and it's going to fix it. I am why that concern is anecdotally people in the field that simply work around that mathematics because the overriding this is observation number one. The way we're tying compensation now to the model puts them in a position where if I've got several second, third, say fourth year teachers and I'm worried about retaining them, I'm going to probably be in this of do I really evaluate them straight up, or do I say to myself, I recognize beginning teachers are going to need some improvement and some coaching, and I don't want to hurt them financially. How do we do this? I'm not taking a position. I'm saying observationally, I think as we think about this, we see what the fact is of how we continue to time off compensation, but I'd like to see differentiation so that effective teachers are really truly set apart. But that probably means there's going to be very fewer in that very top column. Second observation is this, and I didn't see this in the report. I'm anxious to hear if this is commented on. All the training right now to get fidelity of this is based on the assumption everybody's already in the queue. You know, I come from higher ed, and I can tell you right now that we prepare and the way we prepare principals is still externally driven because of state partnerships that have going on of our preparation programs that are aligned to national program standards. That may or may not reflect the kind of saying that teachers are highly effective. And I'm curious to know how we're closing the gap between preparing the next generation of teachers that's reflected in our evaluation instruments versus need to external peer review because we don't have capacity to review state programs. I'm concerned about principal evaluation in particular because if you're preparing people to evaluate teachers, part of what you need to get fidelity is how did you put them through the preparation? And I don't see that being state-driven. I know our programs are largely influenced by what the outside says because we've got to get a favorable external program review in order to be able to keep recommending candidates for license. I think there's a distinction that is on everybody. But if you want to eat this elephant, start always service in preparation for license for either teaching or school. Just an observation.
I have a quick question. On your slide, the last entry says 10% not applicable, not evaluated for the system. Can you provide clarification on that?
So if the teacher is on an MLA, they would not have been evaluated.
There were some corporations that were still under contract that weren't using any model yet. And those, I believe, all those contracts have ran out this year. I think it's the final one to where everyone will be, is that not? How many schools are still under contract?
This coming, we'll have about 15, 16 pizzerias. So we're shrinking it down from the waiver is about 40. We sent out a letter encouraging this to go into an MOU because it's out on performance, because the ACA requires us to be full of 15, 16. So off of her, we're down to about, I think, 21 districts that have not opened their contract and implemented the evaluations.
And do we know how, like, what's the drop dead date for the last corporation?
Last one is 18 or 19. That's
Who did a 10-year contract, or what did they do?
So next year, what do we expect the percentage to be?
Right, that's my question. So we have 10% of the population not being evaluated. What's the projection for next time we do this?
When we say not evaluated, that's for the districts that actually submitted the DOE ER report. So those not open, we're not required to provide the report rating. So that's the districts that actually implement not evaluated. In this year, we are for the not evaluated, 5 boxes of why. So was it FMLA? Did the teacher leave the district? We get a couple, so we can get a better picture of, you can't just say, what's the reason for it? So that'll help this year.
So what's the criteria for a waiver to not evaluate a certified staff person?
Not contract.
Not opening your contract?
If their contract is in place when this statute was passed and has not expired yet, so they are required to reopen it, they are grandfathered in because they're still under a contract that statute is in place. As those contracts and their bargain, then they must be their planning.
Okay. The question remains, what percentage of staff next time we do this category of not evaluated, not applicable? Do we have a decrease, same, in
Because that depends on if a teacher MLA, if they left the district, so it'll be a district by district analysis. Also, again, about 20 more districts submit the ER, and all charter schools are submitting the ER this year due to the reporting requirements that are updated in the code.
Thank
We'll
you.
see a big jump in the percentages.
For the percentages, but not category. I can't percent of teachers off on family leave.
Not 10%.
and anomalies that might be present. Constantly monitor the process. So those are the standards that we make a plan. And these standards are non-compliance. Obviously, in the third bullet, that there is a legislative component there, so we districts to be compliant, but we also expect. The next slide is some of the data that we know our training district cohort, and this just shows you a little bit about the confidence level that our teachers and administrators had when we started on certain elements, and the impact of the training and their rating after our training. This training, again, that we give districts in this stage had to do with the development of the plan. Putting the plan in place, having teachers, administrators, central office at the table, and our process is a very collaborative process. We believe strongly that everyone has to be at the table in order to get buy-in from those who have to implement. This is another slide that shows some data from one of our districts. Their teacher association did a survey after the first year of implementation. And we show you this, and we preface our next section around the data statewide to say that, we think that our districts that we work with who are implementing their plans with some kind of fidelity have more confidence across teachers, across principals, or district. They have developed the plan, and they are implementing the plan. This is just another slide that shows some data from one of our districts. This superintendent asked their teachers about the knowledge level that they had at the beginning in the fall, and then their knowledge level in the spring, and you can see on the right-hand column where we've got some specific differences. Before I hand this over to Hardy, I also just want to talk a little bit about the implementation with the Fidelity tool. We created the rubric first, just as here are the standards, here's what we think you should have in place, and then we looked across the state, and we have lots of conversations across the state. And it occurred to us that there was no way to measure fidelity of implementation. That in fact, plans are being monitored for compliance, which we think is a very good thing. But we also think that the implementation tool is a way that districts can begin to monitor the fidelity of implementation. And there's a rating scale, as you can see on that tool, that should inform a district, a state, a university, how that district is doing in implementation. So we want you to spend a little time at some point and take a look at those tools. It would be interesting to feedback. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
I have a question. Is that tie in support of the Indiana football team this weekend? Pleased you're wearing that.
I actually have some of the pants. We gave you some pants.
There you go. Candy stripes, right? Yeah, excellent.
So Sam is right. As you move into the current research, one of the things I consider is we probably work with 25 districts or so in the past several years. And one of the things I like to say is that wherever I have gone across this state doing this work, I found some very committed and highly skilled professionals. I try to say that every chance I get because it's really energizing to, in this time, about the dialogues of public education becoming more effective, to see that what we have out there are committed people. And that makes a difference because we know that they care about the children, the students that are in the classrooms. So what does the current research say? We wanted to find out if what we were experiencing with the districts we were working with is something that was typical of what was happening around the state. So what we did was we put this survey together. And the survey purpose was to look at the beliefs and the confidence that teachers, principals, superintendents across the state have in the new teacher evaluation process. We used a lighted scale with questions that were aligned with our teacher appraisal plan development rubric. The first 11 questions were actually repeat questions from a survey we had done a couple of years earlier when the new legislation was first being implemented across the state to see how superintendents felt about it. And we did this with the cooperation and assistance of our INTAS advisory board. And what we see in this is an opportunity for all of the educators in the state to sit around the table and come up with a consensus around constructive solutions or commentary for improving this process throughout the state of Indiana. As you can see, we have a representative sample size. When we looked at it, it's obvious that from this we can make statements that are actually accurate statements about how superintendents, teachers, and principals in the state feel. So, the first set
But it was a voluntary response.
It absolutely was. And we tried to make sure that we did so in a non-threatening manner. As a result of that, some things we could not identify. For instance, we didn't ask a teacher what district they were in, because we knew that that could have a chilling impact upon the willingness to respond. We actually worked with the processes there at Indiana University to ensure that there was confidentiality and participation of teachers in this process. So the first set of questions was about the belief that teachers and superintendents and principals had. And this was that I believe that teacher evaluation needed to be changed. I believe that student academic growth and teacher effectiveness are related. I believe that instruction can be effectively rated by evaluators. And when we look at the response patterns around these frequencies and percentages, the initial analyses included frequencies, they included response rates, things that you could readily observe in the data. This is what it looked like. So, surprise, right? Superintendents are generally much more positive about the process than principals, who are much more positive about the process than teachers. Now, the thing about this graph that's important is that the initial reaction is to jump back and say, wow, look at those differences, we've got some problems. But this is, I believe, a perfect picture of, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? So what it says to us there is that we really have an opportunity. Because if all of the teacher responses were skewed to the right, on the negative side, that's a different kind of problem to solve than looking at an opportunity to address the concerns of those who have concerns about the process and building upon the assurance and the favorableness of those who feel that the process has met. Yes.
Just a quick question, because when I looked at the sample size itself, it seemed like you've got a tremendous response from superintendents, 218, and I think of how many districts we have in Indiana. I mean, that's a fairly high response rate. How does that teacher size of 3,000 compare when you think about the totality of teachers? Because if we do comparatives, part of what I'm wondering about is, I don't know if the results would change, but is there any chance that the results are affected on the teacher's side if the representative sample was from just a specific set of districts? Or in terms of proportionality, I guess is where I'm going with this, is how does the teacher sample compare to the superintendent sample, which is obviously very high?
Before we actually drew the conclusions that you're going to see at tail end of this presentation, we actually consulted with quantitative people at both Indiana University and at IUPUI. And based upon the consultation with them, we feel what we have here is a representative sample from which conclusions can be drawn that are representative of all teachers in the state. This is a statistical kind of thing.
Right.
But I can tell you that we did some demographic factors to get into distribution in terms of urban, suburban, region of the state, that sort of thing. And I think you may have seen it if you've got the report there that later on in the report, it shows that there was really no difference in terms of responses based upon those demographic factors. That suggests to us that what we have is a representative sample from across the state. So we can talk about that.
Okay. So it's been blessed by the statistician. Okay. Right. Good to know.
The emphasis here is on quantitative results, obviously, so far. And there may be more to the story, but did you collect qualitative information? Because
What do we make of it?
quantitatively, the teacher responses are really balanced, which I would agree with you, that's a positive indicator, but I want to know why they feel that way. So is there qualitative data that you collected that you're going to report on?
A limited amount with the superintendents. Phase 2 of all this is to actually do focus groups and interview people and find out why people feel the way that they do. So we do not have qualitative data at this point. And I think you would know that if we had the qualitative data out there, considering the time frame from when this was administered and actually being able to present it to you as report again, that's going to be a somewhat more laborious process.
Sure.
Because you're going to have code responses, you're going to have to come up with categories of patterns of how people answer questions. So,
Sure.
But you know what? That is the meat of it. That
Right.
is the stuff that's very attractive, and I think we look forward to moving into that phase 2 of this. So,
What's your timeline for phase 2?
well, we really haven't planned it out yet.
We're anxious to see it. I need some meat, it's getting close to lunch.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is come up with a brief so that they can inform the discussion that you folks are having, as well as the legislature.
Right.
All right, so I'm not going to read each bullet on every slide. I'll just bring out a couple that I think are worth talking about. So here we look at the relationship between instruction, student growth, and achievement. The important thing here is that, you know, of all these questions, superintendents, principals, and teachers all agree to a very high rate that there's a relationship between teacher effectiveness and student achievement. That's a good thing for us, right? Then you'll see there's some changes as we move down into some of the other questions. The questions about accurately and fairly judging instruction. There's a difference of opinion between teachers and then between superintendents and principals. So these are kind of reflect what's going on in the national dialogue also. So there's nothing here that's inconsistent with what we know the conversation is about at the national level. We also ask questions about the Indiana teacher evaluation law. So it's interesting to see here that we begin to see more divergence. The superintendents feel more strongly about the law than principals feel more strongly about it than teachers, and teachers again are at that 50-50 level of whether or not teacher evaluation in Indiana needed to improve. The interesting thing about it is that you have the teachers out there saying, look, we need to do something about this. I think that is a testimony of professionalism.
Yeah.
You know, everyone writes to have an evaluation process that really gives them information on how well they're doing and what they need to improve. When you look at concern about whether or not the teacher evaluation law in Indiana has improved teacher evaluation processes in their district, we see again the laws begin to argue more. Fewer principals believe that, although more principals than teachers, and here we begin to see the real impact of teacher beliefs or concerns about the new law. Only 19% of them believe the new law has improved teacher evaluation processes in the district. And finally on this slide, 88% of the superintendents believe that student growth should be tied to teacher evaluation, 72% of principals, and only 32% of teachers.
How is that? You know, I just want to expound upon that point. I mean, 2/3 of teachers in the state of Indiana do not believe that, according to your survey, do not believe that student growth should be tied to teacher evaluations. I just find that incredibly perplexing that, you know, a student's growth in the classroom shouldn't be, in some measure, part of my performance evaluation. I mean, if not the growth of the students in the classroom, then what?
Yeah. I think that, I don't want to speculate on this again until we have the opportunity to do those focus groups that we're talking about. But as we move down into the presentation, we're going to get into something, we're going to get into factor analysis about the things that are driving these responses. There's somewhat of a shift in this particular bullet when you get down into those analyses, because what you're going to see is that when you look at the mean about it, how strongly people feel about it, the mean for whether or not teachers feel like that this should be tied to their evaluation is not much different than how teachers feel about the processes and the rubric. So when you see the fact that teachers are saying something like this, and then you hear the conversation that the teachers are much more in favor of using the input side of the evaluation process, using the rubrics. When you start looking at the factor analysis of this and the mean differences, essentially there's not much difference, which is very interesting. I think this is because we've gone through an era of standardized testing and an accountability piece, in some ways that's been predicated in the teacher's mind upon punishment. And if we can figure out a way to recast accountability discussion so that it's energizing and affirmation about the effort for those teachers out there who've been, laboring in the venues for years. If we can do this and in truth then make the accountability system meaningful and supported, I think you will see a change here. The other piece of this I think that's important is when you start talking about standardized tests, remember teachers that see the standardized test as someone says a black box out there. We give the students the test, they fill out the bubbles on the test, we package them up, we give them to our school district test coordinator. The test coordinator takes it down to the central office. Central office sends it to the state or to some national place, and then we rate on pins and needles for the results of that. For teachers, that's a process where they feel a lack of control over. The one thing that they do feel they have control over is what goes on in the classroom. I think the question is whether or not they think it can be accurately measured.
I think that's right. I think that's spot on, and I think it's the variables that they don't feel they have any control over that causes them to, that creates a result. And I think it really shows up in a slide you're coming to where you see that only 14% of these teachers will believe that this actually had an impact on student learning, which is, that's, to me, that was a significant finding.
One of the things that when we talk about the recommendations that we found with the districts that we work with is that if you take time to train teachers and evaluators at the same time, so that everyone understands what the expectations are. Everyone understands what the standards are. You have a very different kind of relationship between evaluators and teachers and the evaluation systems. But that's at the tail end of the conversation when we start talking about recommendations. At least about local plan impact, I think that you see similar kinds of patterns. I'll point out the fact that teachers have apprehensions about whether or not this has had a positive impact on teaching and learning. That's what Dr. Oliver just said. Now, moving into the next level of the survey, we wanted to find out the confidence level of evaluators, how confident teachers were in their evaluators and how confident the evaluators were in themselves. So, I'm pleased to find out that when you look at principals and their answers to I'm confident that evaluations in my district have made a difference, or a principal says I am confident that I can conduct an effective evaluation, our principals are very confident in their ability to conduct effective evaluations. Teachers not quite as confident as principals. But again, they have 61% of them feeling that the evaluators in the district understanding and use the rubric is very different than only 25% saying that. 88% of the principals believe that they can give clear feedback. Teachers have some concerns about it. That gets into the training piece that Dr. Cole will talk about later. We think that's very important. The feedback is about how people are able to grow and continue to become highly effective or to become highly effective. Yes.
We were able to align this perception of the quality of the evaluation with the actual scores a teacher received. So you understand the question. So if I'm highly effective, I'm more likely to say that, yeah, I have a lot of confidence in how my principal evaluated me, versus if I did not receive highly effective or effective, then I'd probably say, well, there's something wrong with the system, it's unfair, or my principal doesn't know how to do this. Did you happen to look at that data?
We did not, and I see that's in part of, it's in your strategic plan, is one of the standards that you're going to look at with the data.
Correct, that's why I'm asking you, it's in our plan.
We did not have that data, we love that, but we did not have that data at the time that we gave the survey.
Okay, so it might be something you may add.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the confidence and the use of student learning in evaluations. 89% of principals are confident that they understand, communicate, and use assessment results in the evaluation process and develop measurable and achievable student learning goals. Only 41% of teachers. So I think that gets, again, back into the concern about, why would you want to do something in your evaluation if you don't believe it's going to be wrong?
Right.
Relationship between teacher evaluations and professional development. We actually believe that this is probably the most crucial element in the evaluation process. When you start talking about what it means to support highly effective teachers, we actually believe that we have to get beyond what the final rating was. the most powerful data in the evaluation is what happens within the domains of the various rubrics. So when you look at the different elements of planning, and you look at the different elements of instructional delivery, and you look at the different elements of the classroom environment, and you look at the different elements of professional and collegial relationships, there are several different elements that make up the ratings for each of those domains. The differentiated ratings really should appear there because that allows a district or a state to carve out a professional development initiative that's focused upon the design and the delivery of instruction effectively, and as well, the collegial behavior of teachers with each other in schools. That, in some ways, would counteract this feeling that if we only have a certain pool of money, and we have to have a certain number of us going to be ineffective, what we heard just yesterday in talking to teachers was that actually causes teachers to back away from the collegiality that we're looking for. If we can get down into the ratings, are teachers able to use probing questions that are open-ended and cause children to think in critical ways? Are teachers able to demonstrate that their knowledge of content and pedagogy is evident in their instructional plan? Are they? Those are the items that are within the domains, and that's the heart of professional development. We think that's very important in all this. Okay, so what are the underlying factors that are driving all of these results? So there have to be some general things that all things are related to. And so we decided that, working with our statistical people, that we needed to see if there are some underlying factors or constructs that answer the question of what creates this variation. So that's what we did. Here's what we found out. There are roughly 3 factors. One is measuring student growth and achievement with validity and reliability. That pops up. That's really important to all of the people that are responding to the survey. Accurately assessing teaching and learning in that evaluation. Do I believe it's really happening in an accurate and fair fashion? And whether or not the new evaluation system, its relationship with compensation, professional development, and its impact upon teaching and learning is salutary. That's an important thing to people. Am I being treated fairly? Is this going to hurt me? Is this going to help the students in my classroom? Those are the 3 factors. Here's what we found. When you look at it, you'll see that the mean results are fairly predictable and somewhat consistent with the response frequencies. However, the interesting thing to know is that the superintendents are almost at 6. Even though the principals at 5 are at 5.41, remember, they're still significantly different than the superintendents at this, so they feel differently. But they are in agreement somewhat. And even though the teachers are at 3.83, that's really right in the middle. And that's reflected on that very first slide. So you look at the validity of measuring teaching and learning, you see a similar pattern. Again, teachers are right there in the middle. When we look at the responses of the new evaluation system, you see the teachers have a little more concerns there. That mean drops a little bit. But the superintendents and principals pattern, the principals pattern is a little lower. The superintendents are still right there because they believe that their job is to develop system management initiatives to make a difference in their districts, and that's what they think that we're doing. That's important to know. All right, so we were concerned about teacher demographics and beliefs. Do teacher demographics make a difference? And here's what we found. That brings K-3 held significantly more positive views of the validity of measures of student achievement and growth. Now, people ask the question of why do you think that is? There are some who say that it's because they really aren't in the evaluation system. I think there's another reason. If you think of what happens with the teachers of very young children, they're able to see developmental changes that happen very rapidly sometimes, and they're very obvious. Those teachers know that they can look at and measure whether or not their children, their students are growing. Now, whether or not they think that there is an outside test they can come in and do it is a different question. Teachers with less than 4 years of teaching experience felt significantly more positive views of the new evaluation plan than did every other teaching experience group. We actually see that as something that's encouraging about the products of higher education. That means you're having teachers that are coming out of our institutions of higher learning now who have been immersed in the new pedagogy, who have been immersed in the new expectations, and they are excited about being in their schools doing their jobs. We believe the challenge is keeping them excited, keeping them engaged. And the other piece to that is helping those veteran teachers feel affirmed and helping them to meet the challenges of the new standards. We think that ultimately is a challenge we have addressing climate, not just in the classrooms of the schools, but climate across the state. And then finally, when you look at the residents, location in the state, this is what we talked about earlier, but that is urban, suburban, length of plan implementation time. We have it up here as not being significant. We don't think that it has a meaningful, significant relationship, but we do know that there's some noise there we're looking at. We just weren't ready to report out of that just now. If you think about it, it could make sense that it could have some influence on the response. Whether or not they're in special education, ELL, all those things, did not appear to make a difference.
On that, teacher demographics and belief factors, you mentioned residences. And did you happen to look at leadership, whether it's in urban or suburban or rural? There were some school boards at the local level who came out in favor of it. Mm-hmm. Some school boards were very public that they were against it. Mm-hmm. Were you able to look at that impact on teacher perceptions?
We did not. But you're absolutely right, because climate has a big impact on how people feel, and that will be reflected in their responses. We did not have that question.
So the perceptions could be based not on the system itself, but it could be based on leaders in that community either being for it or against it.
The answer to that is that, yes, they could be. The fact of the matter is that the entire environment of teacher evaluation also shapes how people feel about it. So if you think about the discussion at the national level, if what people are attending to is the negativity of it all, that condition responses also. That's one of the things we're talking about with the advisory.
Good.
How do you have a conversation about constructively addressing the new challenges that we're seeing in classrooms so that we can, in fact, ensure that we create students who can contribute to a more powerful workforce in the state of Indiana and across the globe? How can you do that in such a way that you affirm teachers and create an environment where everybody feels like we're pulling together? So we're hoping that we can come up with that kind of a dialogue with our advisor. I think it's very important.
Just a recommendation to you, as you construct new surveys, I would ask that you have some questions dealing with on what basis do they have this perception?
Right.
Is it based on leadership in the community, their school board saying either positive or negative, or is it something they just perceive, or do they have some actual evidence of using the system and participating in the system that makes their decision either positive or negative? I think that has a huge effect on the study, because perceptions can come from anywhere. Is their perception based on informed evidence, or is it just based on someone feeding them misinformation?
That's an excellent suggestion. The basis for the responses, I think, that's something that is worth looking into. And I think it could shed some light on, we have even greater understanding of why people respond. I think that's something for us to check. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Additionally, there were two other factors about the confidence. And this was whether or not people actually knew how to conduct a good evaluation. Now, there's two sides to this. One is, do they understand the rubric, do they understand the timeline? Do they know how to give feedback? That's one piece to it. That's the process part of it. But then there's another procedural part, and that's what the technical side of it. Do they understand the new teacher evaluation law? Do they actually know when our observations are and how many we're supposed to get? Those are the technical aspects. The responses here, we're going to make choices. So, the principals again felt like they knew it. Teachers were saying, well, we're waiting to see. And that's pretty much what it's saying. But the same thing, so what the principal says, the technical side of it. The principals feel like they got it. We think the answer to this is making sure the teachers are trained too. If you train them together, and they're sitting in the room together when the training is going on, and they're looking at each other, then they understand, they know what they both understand, and they know what they don't understand, and they can get clarification on it before they get on the thing. We think this is really important. Principals have been trained, but we think it's important to train teachers also. And it's important for teachers to know the training that they're evaluating.
Dr. Murphy, just to add to that, I had an opportunity this summer to take a group of Indiana teachers over to the United Kingdom, and then we were in Scotland, your home country, nation. They were fascinated by the fact that their principals there are all required to teach at least one period a day, even at the elementary level. And the takeaway from that was fascinating for me because the teachers felt like that put the principals in a better place to understand their anxiety or their concerns with respect to how they're evaluated, because they're evaluated in a parallel fashion. And it made the conversation, so it closed the gap between feeling like something was being done to me versus something's being done with me to make me better. So so I think you're right on spot with what this data is suggesting to us, is it's the gap between people saying, yeah, we've got a tool, but do you really understand my role enough to evaluate me fairly that's going to give me constructive feedback that's going to help me get better? And I think that's where that relational trust is teetering right now.
Absolutely. We think that it's very important to bring people together in such a way that that trust is there. Because I think we all know what we want. I think we all want the same thing. So this question about how we're going to work together to make it happen is really what the opportunity we have in front of us. So finally, we had some additional findings from our superintendents. This is related to the earlier question. We did not ask them whether or not they were using RISE, and then the second question said, or are you using Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
We asked them if they were using either or one of the two. And so you see it's about 72%. They're concerned about resources. They have to conduct observations. I think they're finding it very time-intensive principles. Training teachers is a challenge for them. There's levels of strategy. Professional development, resources for that. And then you see they all are concerned about resources for increased compensation. I wonder if 5% are they?
4.2%.
Clear guidance on the law is important too. That last bullet is important because, as Cindy said earlier, we know that if this is not managed right from the county manager, because I can tell you from experience, if you got an evaluation, any of it, and you turn around and look and you say, okay, it's not you're right there. The whole evaluation process loses its credibility, and the story. So, those are the findings. Sam's going to come back and do the conclusions and recommendations, and then we'll be ready to answer any questions.
Thank you.
The fun part. So, you've heard already many of our conclusions, and we talked a little bit about those. We know that superintendents and principals' responses suggest that, their beliefs are pretty positive overall. Teachers, as Hardy said, we've got a window of opportunity here. They are right on the fence. And we were pleased to know that the data, both the confidence as well as beliefs, were not clear on the negative. And I think we tend to frame things in the positive. We tend to think that there's an opportunity. Certainly, principals are more confident in their ability to conduct teacher evaluations than their teachers. We think, again, they've been trained. There's a great deal of variability in the beliefs and confidence level of teachers, and as we said, I think there's some opportunity here. The interesting demographics around our folks who are new to the profession, 1 to 4 years, is fascinating. I think for us, it will continue to engage us in dialogue about what that means, what the implications of that, and we hope that it encourages dialogue with you as well. Our K-3 teachers, we did ask a demographic question about whether teachers were tested or untested, and there was no significant difference there. However, one could argue that K-3 teachers in many ways are untested areas. We think that there is, one conclusion here is that teachers need to be more certain about this entire process. We talk about this concept in our center around teacher certainty. It's really related to instruction, which means that if a teacher is certain about an intervention, certain about their instruction, that it does have a positive impact on student learning. I think the same thing can be applied to this process of evaluation. If they're certain about the aspects of their evaluation, they're going to have more confidence. And then certainly there are important aspects of the teacher evaluation survey responses that indicate agreement among teachers, superintendents, and principals. So we did have some areas here's our recommendations. The first one is, and this is related to what I discussed with you about our two tools. We would like to see a differentiated rating system for district teacher evaluation plans that look at quality in addition to compliance. We think that compliance is absolutely essential, but we think if we're going to get this right in the state of Indiana, we have to have some standards of quality, and those standards we've identified in our rubric and our implementation. The second recommendation is to provide clear standards for plan development and implementation. The third is to develop incentives for the development and implementation of plans that go beyond compliance. So the idea here is, if we expect compliance and quality, what are the incentives for districts to do that? The fourth one is to provide resources and support for plan development and implementation fidelity. So if I'm a district and I need some support around compliance, and then I think, well, we'd like to have some quality in our plan and implementation, resources to do that, we think is going to be really critical as we continue down this path. Another recommendation is that we think we need more research. We think that there needs to be more research around plan development, research around implementation, and the effectiveness across the state plan. I think that's been mentioned earlier in terms of phase 2 with more qualitative research to get at the why and reasons that people are responding the way they are. But I also think that we'd like to look at some longitudinal research over time. And as you look at other states, what's fascinating when we thought about the survey and created the survey is there's really not a lot out there across other states that are looking longitudinally at perceptions and confidence level and also the qualitative aspect. So we'd like Indiana to consider being a leader in that respect. We think that there needs to be ongoing evaluator and evaluation training for teachers and principals. And the key word here for me, I think, is ongoing. We certainly had principals who have been trained. We have some teachers who have been trained, but that's not a one-time event.
That's right.
It's kind of like the observation process. It's not an event. So we think that it's important that the training be continuous, that it be collaborative, that teachers and principals and evaluators are trained together. We have, in the process of creating an online evaluator training module that will be piloted starting in January, launched in the fall. It will be model neutral, so the hope is that districts will be encouraged to have their evaluators go through the online training modules and receive some kind of certification with a little C. And then that's the first step, because the second step is job embedded professional development, as you all know. It has to be local, it has to be supported, it has to have the support of the data that's guiding it. And so for us, this ongoing training is essential. And finally, and this is really crucial, I think there has to be support for the development and testing of common assessments for non-tested personnel, especially at the secondary level. What we hear in all of our in-test districts, what we hear across the state, is that the tools and the measures that are being used to measure growth are still in the infancy stage. And it gets to the heart of the credibility, I think, that you saw in some of our data around, yeah, we think that it's important to measure, we think that you can measure growth and achievement of ability, but we're not sure it's really happening. We're not sure we have the tools. So we think that this is an area for continued development and research in terms of creating this tool. The elementary level, there's a need there as well. We're finding a major gap to be in secondary. Are you going to anything else?
I think that there's something that we talked about, the post developing the slides. A couple of things. One is that what you're seeing emerging in the literature is this concept of what does it mean to have student feedback, and that's something that I think is worth a discussion. It certainly is something that I think has to be handled direction. But anymore, when you look at the research, that is one of the things that I think is very highly correlated with whether or not teachers actually make a difference in the classroom. So that is how we engage with students. And one other thing is that's this idea of, is there an affective side to all of this that's worth looking at? How do people engage with students? Are there some characteristics of what it means to be a good teacher? You know, and that the students can describe it, maybe not necessarily in how well you know the content, the pedagogy, that has to be there too. But what kind of person do students feel? What kind of person is standing before them? So that's the affective side of this, and we think that's an important piece that a lot of people thought it emerged in the conversation. We talk about the great teachers of our past. At the end of the day, we talk about how some teachers were tougher than others, but we also never said that anybody was a great teacher if they were not fair. And the fairness dimension is about how students feel about sitting in classrooms with adults. And I think that's something that needs to emerge as part of our conversation.
You'll actually see in our in-task rubric, it's separated to highly effective, need improvement, and ineffective. So we apply the same ratings to plans. And if you look at our section on measures, you'll see in our highly effective category that we say that districts should use student surveys or student feedback. And we don't have many districts in the state right now who are doing that, partially because I think there is concern about validity. And yet we know that from the Gates report and others that it is very highly correlated to teacher effectiveness. And so it's an interesting work.
One final comment. We took out a slide that had what people say about the process that they're engaged with. But one of the things for us that was important was to see, to compare what we were hearing from our districts with this information from around the state. And it's very affirming when you run across people who've been part of the process to come up to you and say, you know, working with you guys made a difference. You know, our teachers are more confident, they're more trusting. It made a difference in us implementing this change in our district. And we're hearing that over and over again. That says to us that the secret to all of this is making sure that everybody says the same and everybody feels like their voices.
I truly appreciate my Indiana University colleagues being here today, Hardy and Sandy. And we always talked about making data-driven decisions. And this is an example of the time we spent, I think, very wise investment this morning in getting some hard data on Indiana teachers and Indiana principals and Indiana superintendents. A lot of the research sometimes that we look at is national data or data from another state, which may or may not be informing us on Indiana policy. So I really commend you for bringing to us Indiana data, real-life data, authentic data that will really help us make informed decisions in the future.
Thank you very much.
I just want to echo thank you so much. This was excellent. When I was going through it last night, this is probably, in fact, it may be the only study I've seen so far post-RISE that really has taken a serious look at this. And I think you really did a great job, even though I agree with David, I'd love to see some of that qualitative data, I know you do too. I think your inclinations of where that's going to take you, I think are spot on with just anecdotally what we hear. And I think it has real implications then for what we do to improve the current nature of that process and that system. I would love to have a subsequent conversation around the rubrics themselves at some point if we can work that out, because like David, this has probably been one of the best use of my time since I've been on the board this morning.
We'd love to engage you in conversation about what we're doing about the rubric as well.
Yep. I just say me too, so great job. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you very much.
That's right, that's right. Thank you. Oh, do you want to take just a 5-minute quick break? Yep. Break? Great.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Would you like high? I think we're ready. Why don't we call this meeting back to order? And then that important for the state is to engage our stakeholders in initiatives. slide 20, President Committee will advisory group. Yeah.
Evaluation system next steps.
Okay, do you want to cover that? Okay. Okay, so we're on recommendations for evaluation system next steps.
Our recommendations are that we assess the implementation successes of the evaluation system and the challenges we've had to date. How's it work? And what are we going to do in the system? And that we use practice guidance from national reflect establish clear guidance to ensure compliance of locally developed models with federal and state requirements, ensure appropriate technical assistance and support from the state for LEAs, and to establish clearer definition of what significantly informed means to align with the guidance from the USDA. Stakeholder throughout. We've heard a lot of those things.
I'd like to add on that point that I hope that we can continue to work with Dr. Going forward, and I think it would also help us, as you indicate in the second, that we national best practice, we engage experts here in Indiana on our evaluation system.
And slide 2 that is to assess guidance and resources and monitoring SOL because we've heard a lot of concerns from superintendents, teacher stakeholders. Some specific concerns include that SLOs are finalized between school leaders by early to mid-October. Due to a lack of training opportunities, a comprehensive, well-organized resource system, a number of school districts are struggling to complete SLOs that allow for teachers to be properly evaluated during the first semester of school. They don't get them done because the results aren't back necessarily in time. Superintendents, teachers, and school leaders have a shared vision, specific concern that the resources provided aren't cohesive and school-friendly due to lack of categorization for various elements of teacher evaluation found on the web page. So a clearer, specific steps would be helpful to the teachers and superintendents and principals. Teachers and school leaders are concerned about the lack of consistency in SLO, a percentage of students per class, and a teacher A identifies pass is efficient, but teacher B might say passing is sufficient. Their own SLOs. Well, one consideration is the class current level of performance. They're asking for some consistency in the level, in the percentage of students mastering the course from English 10 class to another English 10 class. It might look different in two different classrooms, and they'd like it to look, in fairness, they'd like it to look and be consistent. And teachers are also communicating concerns about the lack of the, in terms of the, and so certainly at a district the size of us, one classroom, school, as it is of services and understanding by the principals.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to add, so Sandy just presented on one of the recommendations was developing consistently used for non-tested grades and subjects. So Indiana is part of the National Governors Association, 49 other states, talking to the education advisor from North Carolina, challenges that they're finding, that they've developed a lot of assessments at the state level for those non-federally mandated testing. We're getting back around having testing. Something that we need to keep in mind, the board's going to be grappling with changes to the HRF system on topics that come up with multiple measures, which has been a desire to have additional measures than just Italy and math. I was just talking to some of those from and resources that were asking them to consider annual testing in science. I think this is something that come up is people, then you have to balance that with and also cost. I mean, these are all very important topics and they interrelate and they have all complexities. So it's relevant.
Great, thank you. So, real quickly, I'm included in here somewhere, but where do we, and I'll, maybe Bob has a comment, but where do we close the feedback loop where we're getting this kind of incredible information with legislative leadership, particularly those maybe in the House and the Senate Education Committees, where because I don't think we can ignore this compensation issue. If we don't at least raise it with our legislative friends, I worry about the fidelity of the system long term when you've got teachers looking at their families and worried about themselves, and principals who are benevolent in that understanding how all that plays into anything we might try to do here. So that's, and I think the second, the SLOs, I guess we work with the department to understand how redundancy measures are built in to ensure that there's some comparative analysis to make sure the data is accurate before it goes out. I continue to hear repeatedly, just as recent as this week, that, for example, growth data that went in, recalled back in because it wasn't the first time it went out. And I understand that one of the things we heard in is accurate. Rechecks before it goes out, because for the system to work, there's got to be some faith that what's coming to them is accurate.
Brad worries about our relationship with the legislative leadership and Senate committee under another item. Appropriate now, I would ask that consider calling a meeting of either the House and the Senate Education Committee with us, either all three of us, or if we have to meet separately based on their schedule, that we do that, to start building relations, discussions, our policy making and their agenda, and bring. Been on the board a little over a year, and some similarly legislators in leadership, these kinds of discussions. But I think that we get together more in a formal sense and have like this with them. I think they would have benefited tremendously the presentation this morning. Maybe some other things that so once we get into the legislative cycle, all on the same page, already have those discussions in a group setting, all informed on how to move Indiana forward. Is that something the chair would consider?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think as we talk about a legislative agenda, modest or robust, that we can have those conversations with them about an agenda as well as feedback on some of the issues that we're dealing with. Absolutely.
I should mention, when we were with the turnaround committee in Erie last Friday, that Senator Rogers attended, and she actually asked the committee, which is going to be making a full report to the full board in October, November, that actually a presentation come before the Senate Education Committee. So I think there's a desire for the volunteers as well to hear about some of the findings and the work that's been underway.
Great. So I think turning to our next item agenda, stakeholder engagement, and I think there's a slide 21 up. We're looking at establishing advisory groups, which would include development of teacher and school leader advisory groups using individuals from the stakeholders who have helped develop the strategic plan. And the advisory groups will provide guidance and recommendations to the State Board of Education across all state and priority initiatives. And the goal will be that each bi-monthly with the support of State Board staff, and then we'll present their feedback and recommendations to the committee. Do you have something to add?
I certainly support that. My question deals with the composition of these advisory committees. In the past, we've not been involved in appointing these committees, so I would hope if it's an advisory committee to this strategic planning subcommittee that we would appoint these individuals based on recommendations from SBOE staff. And I think that's critical that we provide our support right up front. But I want to be sure that we are getting broad representation and people are put forth that you support that can bring diversity. And so rather than anyone else suddenly appearing, I would hope that it come from Bob or someone from SBOE staff that would make a recommendation to us on a list of names and maybe biography, a line or two. Is that possible? Bob?
Yeah, one of the things that we would suggest is that there was a that advised the plan. We recontact that were involved, and there's a list of people that were involved in development of the plan, and they had indicated like to continue in the board. So we would develop some of those.
Asking for is a vetting beyond someone just participate. I think we had two individuals here this morning presenting that may be good candidates for it, but again, I think we should have people who have particular expertise in addition to wanting to participate. So I would hope that we would carefully vet in a thoughtful kind of way who'd be best to advise us.
Do we formalize that? Because I don't know whether or not we need to or not. I'm asking the chair if there's anything in the minutes, because I agree with my colleague.
Well, I mean, entertain a motion just to.
So the first thing to
It doesn't have to be a formal resolution, but if you want to.
I just want to make minutes. I agree. I'd like the idea, especially David's suggestion that be a recommendation from board staff back to the subcommittee with an approval on those appointments. It's clear how those people had problems with that. Just how he selected people and how that process worked.
Great. So we'll just, minutes reflect that. I don't think there's. Okay. To prioritization of other strategic plan initiatives. Up on the screen, which some of the guiding questions, strategic plan goals, strategies need to be prioritized over there next year. And reason for those goal strategies. How much time will implementation require, and of the strategies. So, you know, legislatively having some goals, and that might be one of those items. And then finally, how do these strategies mesh with the existing efforts, including ADAF modifications, Committee on School Turnarounds, teacher evaluation systems, the assessments, and the RFP response before coming. So I think just in terms of this committee size, strategic holder, take a moment to take a look at the strategies and leading indicators, and then in order of 1 to 4, you know, we can recommend a state champion and project leader, but we take a look at the seating in, mark your top 4 priorities. And we'll just take a minute here to review that.
Also, I think the whole landscape of teaching is changing, where through technology, teachers, the facilitation and technology becomes the way to unleash students to move forward in their own way and as fast as they go. And so the notion that teachers are gatekeepers of knowledge, as when I went to school 1,000 years ago, that's suddenly shattered. Every student, if they have access to the internet, can be their own teacher in a sense with the guidance of either their parents or teachers or other school leaders. I really interested. Last one for point has been, and I think of teacher performance and is really important.
When you go, 1.1, I think, for me, the department to provide a detailed plan and process and schedule communicating and delivering support to educators on the new state standards. I think the people, I think when teachers are coming to that they're going to be successful in doing that. And I think we need to ensure that those things are in place where they're comfortable and that way they can get to work on what they're set to do. 3.1.2 was the one that's new to the table here. Implementing a robust, ongoing two-way communication process with stakeholders. To me, I think if we want buy-in on what we're doing and we want to, perception is reality. And there are some perceptions out there that, well, I don't believe to be true. Perception is reality. I think when those conversations take place and people understand why we're doing what we're doing and the successes that are coming from the things that we're doing, those are things that we need to champion. And I think several of them said here today, we don't spend enough time. We spend all our time trying to fix the things that are broken as opposed to celebrating the so many things that are going right. And I think frustration on the teachers' end comes is that's what we hear all the time is the things that we're fixed. And while it's a minority, I think we need to spend an equal amount of time, if not more time, celebrating the things that are going right. I also had character education in there. I couldn't agree more, David. I think that is as important as anything that we do. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, be good people. Be somebody I want to live beside. And I think that is as important as the standards or anything that we're going to do. I think we need to ensure, and I think the teachers are doing it, but I think when it comes from this board or from the DOE, it's going to get attention. If we say, hey, this is important to us, then they feel like, okay, then it's permissible for me to spend time on this because it's been said that it's important. So I think that's something I'd like to see formalized as well.
Great. Thanks a lot. I don't know if any.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on all strategies. There might be a little prioritization. We're also very busy. I'd like to hear first. We're obviously going to do physical evaluation, and then this engagement. But we would like, how would you like? I also need to because some of the waiver, which includes assessments, maybe to fold that into what the department's already doing, rather than the
I would say that's very important to me, but I think that job is getting done. If we have to eliminate things, the people I speak with are very comfortable with what's expected and what the standards are and what the new standards. They're excited about them. I'll be honest. In most cases, our profession doesn't enjoy change, but they're really excited about what's there, and I think they have a grasp on that. Gordon?
and then also champion.
Sure. I think what I heard was, in addition to those points, was the character education issue being one, the retention issue we talked about. So maybe we focus on those two. I'd raised the issue of the survey and understanding, I'd certainly look at being done, but I think some doesn't be pressed by this committee in terms of, how can we focus on.
Well, I think there was some legislation enacted, and the department might have done a survey around anyway. No, yeah. Or maybe at a this committee. And then some of the higher education stakeholders mentioned at least the Gallup polls should have some national data that can help. So I think we could maybe get you some information, but in terms of fleshed out project plan, staffing, it sounds like
Departments, was the department survey, was it what, can you describe it in further detail?
Details of it. Leroy Robinson, director of that.
Okay.
It was the Family Flex Program Schools was
Okay.
essentially kind of doing identifying schools to engage in that work.
To Mr. Orr's time, meeting, why don't you track that down, circulate it? Perfect. And then we'll have the review that, and then we'll take advisement, and if we want to hear further on it, we can request that from you.
I think it does. The last study session here recently was all on disparity of data, discipline data, which actually dovetailed into policy, which I think is very close.
Right.
Education study session a year or two ago, all around this conversation. Academic with the department is representing us as well as Rescuba. So they're very aligned, I would say. Schools, policy, behavior, and some more.
When you say a session, is that is it possible we can get dates and topics when the, because I'm hearing this for the first time, love to participate since that's something I put in the, but still, we need that we list of all the activities that are happening, and we can pick and choose. Some of us spend a lot of time with this already, but if there's a particular piece of interest, we might want to jump meeting. And again, it's that collaborative and sharing of. Okay, so the dates and so forth, it would be appropriate for us to attend, obviously. So maybe Bob could send us a list of all the dates and topics and how we could participate if we wanted.
Well, I think the department provided us with the staff members of the department who are focused on each of these issues, correct? So that will help us as we need to reach out to the department for further information.
I have a question for you. Second Chair.
Just.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I just want to be sure what the staff's interest is, because there's a reason I'm going to ask this. I'm working from the assumption you're asking priorities because you're linking the next to project management. Can I offer a suggestion or two? Just bring through the model, which was a initiative, and there's no right or wrong on how we settle on the four, but just so that my colleagues and staff's aware, once the scorecard becomes robust and we're seeing that data come back into the scorecard, typically, normally, once you get going, the scorecard will inform what you zero in on. The only thing I wanted to share for my colleagues, before we settle on by whatever method, should be those 4 things that we believe are best going to move those strategies forward if they were focused into a very detailed project charter. And I don't know that since I've been on the strategic planning committee, we've had a chance to actually look at the charter, look at the template, and understand that. But I think when you understand that template, it changes how you think about what you strategically prioritize in your score. So I know it's getting late. I'm going to offer that at some point. I think as we better understand the PMOC process, that the subcommittee really leverage that aspect of what you're trying to do, which is what do you want us to focus on first, second, third.
Well, I think so the CELT's already drafted the project plan for the teacher and principal evaluation system. The board identified that as a priority initiative. So I think what we were planning to do was flesh that out, bring it back, and then do the same for whatever we prioritize.
Okay.
And then we'd like to have a champion that we could share a draft with and get your thoughts. So can we have somebody identify as a champion?
For which
Maybe
one?
it's the full committee for some of them.
Right.
Planning process.
If I would volunteer, would appoint me to head up education initiative.
When you say board champion, that's the project manager for that project.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding how you're using terminology, because I'm trying to learn wired so hard to the other. I'm trying to make sure I'm following with you.
I don't know.
I want to make sure I know what I'm saying. Anything you want.
Said typically there's a board champion, and the higher committee is the PMOC.
Okay.
So,
Right.
I think the equivalency on the chart, if you look at the template that's in our packets, would be you'd be asking David to serve as the sponsor of that particular project.
Right.
And that's important because basically it would be he would be the representative project for an executive decision on a real-time basis. So, different because most times your executive sponsor is different from your project manager. Your project manager could actually be somebody from DOE, from board staff. Project manager's role is to take the deliverables identified and the associated task and make sure they're being executed on schedule and keep that sponsor informed on a real-time basis when a barrier comes up so that he knows whether it's something he can give direction on or whether he's got to come back to the full committee. I'm just offering that out because we have not had a chance to digest that a lot, and that's how that process typically works.
so if the chair would like, you can have a little training session like that on.
I was trying to volunteer him.
As it relates to retention, I'm not sure. I think we'll probably maybe punt that and discuss further amongst ourselves informally. So was there anything else from staff on that point? Okay. So under next steps, we have proposed meeting dates, and I think we talked about trying to do an October meeting as well. That is to be determined. I think the goal will be we have 2 board meetings in the month of October, October 1 and 15th. So we already have a very busy.
Not to interrupt, I'm sorry, but if we could piggyback those just for those that travel, it's nice to have back-to-back days if we could do that.
And that's something I talked with our board staff about in terms of making it easy for our out-of-city travelers to get to both meetings.
Yep.
So, but acknowledging that we already have a very busy month ahead of us, we'll work with staff to figure out what a October committee meeting might look like.
My first thought is 3 of us are traveling on the 15th, so
That's why you guys are going to that.
NASB begins, so
With the 14th?
I don't know what everybody's flight schedule is, but I leave that night after the
I actually will, I will not be here on the 15th, so I leave Tuesday
Okay.
evening for NASB. My flight's at 7:30, so I could do a late afternoon on the 14th. If that,
I could do any time on the 14th.
I'm good on the 14th too.
Afternoon of the 14th.
so late afternoon on the 14th. 3 o'clock. How long do we think we need? 2 hours? Do 3 or 4?
It's fine. I'm open the whole day.
That's fine.
Why don't we just, why don't we say 3 o'clock? And we'll,
And then do you want to go ahead and lock down the November date?
Be good.
And that the 4th is a state holiday, and the 5th is a regular business meeting. So we can do it after, which is always a little bit risky depending on what's going on that day. Or we can do it on
the 4th is election day.
I would suggest we do it on the 6th. We never know how long our board meetings are going to be. On the, on November 5th, you said November?
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do the 6th, but that's,
And the 6th, I have PD on the 6th. But I agree, I mean, it's, if we want, just being blunt, if we want great discussion, sometimes after 8 or 9 hours, it's, it's tough to refocus.
we tried that with the assessment subcommittee and I found that very hard.
I could make the 6th work, I mean, the history conference is in Indianapolis. I just had to, we start still in a couple hours.
Well, if you want, we can look at the following week, that's better for you guys.
It is for me.
That would be better for me if it works for everybody else.
I could do the 6th or the following week. Veterans Day is also the next week. Why don't we,
Is the 7th off the table, or no?
Be there.
You won't be here on the 7th?
it's tougher, maybe tough for you to come down on the 6th and or the 5th.
That works for me.
How about the 13th?
15th is good too.
End of the day better for you, BJ?
I can really make whatever works.
I think morning would be better for me on the 13th.
9 o'clock?
9 o'clock.
That probably gives us enough. Or do you want to make December 6th?
I'd like to do it if we can.
Let's go ahead and schedule it if we can. December 2nd.
Do we meet the 3rd of December as a full board?
Yes.
What's the next day like for everybody? If we did it next morning?
4th?
That's what I'd prefer, yeah.
I'd be
The
fine
4th,
with
the morning of the 4th.
Can we do it a little earlier than?
Sure.
9 o'clock?
Just stay down.
Yeah. 9 o'clock on the 4th.
The December 4th. Do you want to say 8:30? 8 o'clock?
9.
9?
I'm
You're not a morning person?
a 9 o'clock guy too.
Why don't we compromise and say 8:30?
What time?
8:30.
All right.
You can show us in your bathrobe. Great, awesome. One point I wanted to mention is perhaps it's more appropriate for a full board meeting is just with the dropping off of the superintendent off the committee, maybe there is another board member that might want to serve. So that's something that perhaps we can talk briefly at our next board meeting about. Okay. Right. so we can talk further about that. Do we have any other comments, business? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? No. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Claire, can we take these? Who is second? Claire, can we take these?
Yes.